Good evening, everyone. My name is John Taves, and I'm the event coordinator here at McNally Robinson Booksellers. Before we begin, I would like to acknowledge that McNally Robinson is located here on Treaty 1 territory. That's the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe, Cree, Oji-Cree, Dakota, and Dene peoples, the homeland of the Métis Nation. In addition, McNally Robinson itself rests on the land once occupied by the Métis community of Roostertown. We are delighted that you could join us here both in person and virtually for a very special evening with Guy Gavriel Kay tonight, to which you may applaud. We're always so incredibly delighted to have Guy here at the store, so I will not take up too much of your time up at the podium, but I do just have a few very brief housekeeping notes to go over. First, we'd like to extend our most gracious thanks to Penguin Canada, a subsidiary of Penguin Random House Canada, for helping to make this evening possible, and of course, for publishing Guy's work. We're also very grateful to Bruce Symaka for coming on board to serve as our host for this evening. The evening will run with a reading from behind the podium. That'll be followed by a conversation to my left. After the conversation, Guy will address some of your own questions. So as I have mentioned ad nauseum, perhaps to many of you gathered here, if you do have any questions for Guy, please feel free to just wander over to this table and write them down on one of the question forms and slide it into the box. We'll then pass along those questions when the Q&A session starts. If during the Q&A session you suddenly have a burning question, just raise your hand and I'll run over with a sheet of paper as well and a pen so that you can jot it down very quickly. If you're one of those folks watching virtually right now, please just feel free to write any questions you might have into the chat and we will put them to tonight's guest as time permits. Following the event, there will, of course, be a book signing. I'll have some thrilling notes about signing procedure for you at the end, but the only thing I will put in your mind right now is that we will ask you all to remain seated for just one moment while we safely transport Guy Kay over to the table just beside our benches.
Transportation method to be determined.
It'll be very dramatic. But we'll have more information for you on that at the end. Now, we are here, of course, to hear more about All the Seas of the World by Guy Gavriel Kay, a book that returns triumphantly to the brilliantly evoked near-Renaissance world of A Brightness Long Ago and Children of Earth and Sky. In its pages, Guy Kay deploys his signature corner turn to the fantastic to tell a story of vengeance, power, and love. I could go on and deploy a pile of adjectives to describe this book, but we'll leave it to more adept wordsmith than myself, Michael Shaven, who had this to say. Tragic, stirring, romantic, meticulous, comic, rueful, worldly wise, and written in the intimate, deceptively nonchalant voice of a storyteller offering up his great gift. All the Seas of the World is classic Kay, and to this reader at least, there can be no higher praise. Your host for the evening, Bruce Symaka, has humbly asked me to introduce him by name only, but I will selfishly point out that he is one of the closest readers I know, as well as one of the most thoughtful of interlocutors. We're thrilled to have him behind a microphone tonight. We're also thrilled to welcome back our great friend, Guy Gavriel Kay, the author of 14 previous novels, including the Fiona Var Tapestry series, Tagana, The Last Light of the Sun, Under Heaven, River of Stars, Children of Earth and Sky, and A Brightness Long Ago. He has been awarded the International Goliardus Prize for his work in the literature of the fantastic and won the World Fantasy Award for Isabel in 2008. In 2014, he was named to the Order of Canada, the country's highest civilian honor. His works have been translated into more than 30 languages. Please join me in welcoming Guy Gavriel Kay.
With the navigation through the cables and the wires to get here, transporting me somewhere might not be such a bad idea. Everyone always says how happy they are to be to give an event its protocol. I am profoundly happy to be back in Winnipeg, to be at McNally's. This is a homecoming city for me because it's where I grew up, and it's a talismanic bookstore for me. The story some of you may have heard, my mother was Holly McNally's first customer in her small store in Keniston, that she was shopping in that little strip mall and saw that someone had just opened a bookstore. And she could not see a new bookstore without going into a new bookstore and buying a Ruth Rendell or whatever it might be. So we go back a very long way with McNally's and then McNally Robinson. I want to thank John for all he did for the introduction and for coordinating this. This is not part of a formal book tour. I was invited to the Saskatchewan Festival of Authors to do some events there on the weekend. And Penguin, the publicist Penguin, raised the question of if they're coming back this way, which won't stop in Winnipeg if I talk to McNally's. And I said, of course, if they want to do this. And they evidently said they'd love to do this. So that's how this came to be. I'm not, in fact, formally on a book tour for All the Seeds of the World because it came out 15 months ago. Canadians can lag a little bit in saying streaming major Amazon and Netflix movies, but we don't lag 15 months in book tours. We're a little better than that. But the realities of COVID and late COVID meant that when this book came out, the advice from my publishers and from booksellers around the country was that people were not yet ready to again embrace the idea of large gatherings, mid-sized gatherings for an author reading. And so next to no one was touring. There was a fair bit of Zoom and other technology events. And I quite liked the idea. I still like the idea because if an event is done, say live streaming to YouTube or on Zoom with the only format, people who aren't residents of a city that's normally part of a book tour can participate in, can hear an author they like, can hear a conversation they find interesting, even if they don't live in Vancouver or Calgary or wherever it might be. That's the upside of online book events. But there's no substitute for me for something like this. The direct interaction, reading off the reactions of people in the audience, talking to your readers. In many cases, I'm recognizing some of you, there are shameless recidivists in the audience here who keep coming back. I don't know what you think you're doing. And I don't want to say we can't go on reading this way because I think we can. I'm fine with going on reading this way. So on to All the Seeds of the World. Some of you know that I like to read from early in a book, which precludes the requirement of explaining who everybody is and how they got to where they are in the passage you're reading. And in this case, my favorite reading passage is the very beginning of the novel, because it's a book about being exiled. It's a book about being forced in diverse ways away from your home, from your roots, from your family. And the way that events in your childhood can become defining events for your adulthood, for your life, one way or another. And the opening passage is very direct for me about exactly that. It's very short reading. A memory of home can be too far away in time, in distance across the vastness of the earth or of the sea. It can fade or blur for us as the years pass, and there's often pain in that too. In their dreams, some travel back to remembered voices, sounds, scents, images. But many do not dream or not of the place they come from. Too much loss, too old and hard a sorrow. But some who have such dreams forget them in the morning's light where they find themselves. that can be a blessing. There will be others who cannot forget, who wrap themselves in memories within a heavy cloak. They will walk a street in a far city at twilight and hear a stringed instrument down the laneway, and it takes them back. They might decide to go up that lane towards where a film of light suggests a cavern, or perhaps someone's home with a courtyard where music is being offered at day's end. Most often they do not. They do not do that. Perhaps it isn't as they listen the remembered instrument from their childhood, nor the tune of a song their mother sang to them at bedtime after prayers. There are no orange blossoms here, no oleanders, mimosas, no jacaranda trees with blue purple flowers. There might be fountains in this distant city, but not like the ones remembered from that time before they were forced to go away. Uprooted like a tree torn from its earth. For someone else, their memories or the dreams pushed away at sunrise might be very different, but just as hard. From a time, say, before they were stolen as a child from a place with other sorts of trees and flowers, but home. There are many different ways for a home to be lost and for the world to become defined by that loss.
So excited watching John.
We are suitably equipped.
Suitably equipped. Thank you for that. Thank you for that reading, Guy. And thank you for coming to Winnipeg and spending time with us. And thank you very much for asking me to host the conversation, because I'm always delighted to talk with you about books or cocktails.
We could do it too.
We could do that.
It's happy hour.
A happy hour. And John, thank you for your kind words about me. I know you're back there. Thank you. It's so sweet of you. I'm always delighted when a guy has a new book, because he frequently he asks me to talk to it, which is such a treat. But I just love reading your books. They're so, well, okay, I won't say why I'm reading them. They're just so interesting. They're so well put together, the characters, all that stuff. But what I want to ask you, because I've got a few questions. If I look down here, I'm not checking my Twitter feed. It's where my notes are, so that's why I'm checking it. I wanted, we've talked about this, but it's been a while since we've talked about these things. For people who haven't read the book yet, it does not take place in Europe or North Africa. It does not involve relationships between Muslims and Jews and Christians. It does not mention Italy or Spain or Byzantium at all, although those places are kind of might remind you in the back of your mind. Can you talk a little bit about why you don't write about specific places, why you have these analogs?
You have slain me dead with the a little bit. This is the question I always describe as a fabulous question. How many hours do you have? Because I've been evolving this both as a method of fiction and as a subject of essays and speeches for a quarter of a century now, as a modus operandi for how I work. So there are many, many, many aspects to why I find this most congenial. I'll do a couple as quickly as I can, because he said a little bit. I used to like Bruce. But, one, I don't like, as a novelist, the idea of presenting the illusion that I know what Justinian and Theodora and Byzantium had as their favorite position in bed. I'm perfectly comfortable telling you what my Valerius and Alexander were like in foreplay conversation and interaction because I invented them. They are inspired by, they are evoking Justinian and Theodora, and at the back of every novel, I give a selected bibliography for those who want to see what my own origin story for a book is. But I like both the artistic freedom and the moral authenticity of not trading on real lives for my purposes, by not making of, say, Spain's greatest national hero, Elsie, and doing what I feel like doing with him. Making his marriage, making his personality, whatever I feel like doing. Now, and I always have to do this caveat, I'm the king of caveats. The caveat is, some writers I deeply and profoundly respect don't feel this is a problem, that they are gifted and creative, and they see the fact that it's a novel as a get out of ethical conundrum card. They simply say it's a novel, or more frequently and more potently, it's just a movie. It's just a TV show. Nobody's saying this is a documentary. I can make this famous person do whatever I want him to do because it's just a movie. And I'm uncomfortable as a writer with taking that position. The other thing, there are many other things, but briefly, I'm trying to be brief. I told you it's an essay question. I love the way in which that what Rob Wiersma, the writer and critic, called quarter turn to the fantastic, that I like to use, causes you not to know where I'm going. If I write a straight historical fiction, brilliant books are done that way. I love historical fiction. If you know what happened to Anne Boleyn, the novelist can do tremendous emotional and intellectual things with her fate, but they can't surprise you. They can't catch you off guard with the events of history for the reader who knows them. I can, by using this quarter turn, sharpen my sense of the events of the past, offer the reader a what might have been if the Albigensian Crusade, when northern France went down and conquered and destroyed the emerging Provençal culture and the courts of love. I can let you, at the end of the book, think about, what if that didn't happen? What might have been different for the status of women in Western Europe for 700 years if that had happened differently? Not that it would have been different, I'm not playing that game, but it opens up opportunities and questions for the author to work with. And my thesis has always been that anything that helps me as a writer helps you as a reader, because it's giving me an additional tool to work with. Those are two of the aspects of why I do this. Do you want 12 more? I've written, if you do want 12 more, on the website, brightweavings.com, all one word, Bright Weavings, there's a section, I think, called GGK's Words. It's an authorized site, I don't do it. But they have some of my speeches and essays over the years. And a couple of them are specifically on this subject, the quarter turn to the fantastic, and the ethical issues I see with writing fiction about real people. If you do want to know more, it's out there.
I'm glad that you had that lovely full response, because the more you talk, the less I have to do. And it also made me think, because you mentioned movies, because this weekend, I think we've got 2 movies coming out at Vegas. Figures Oppenheimer and Barbie. So it's interesting. Anyway, in the new novel, there, as John mentioned, there are several characters that appear in previous novels, including some of my favorites. I'm so glad to see. I won't say who. Good. Although if you read the list of characters at the beginning, there are some hints there. So why did you bring these characters back? Did you feel you weren't done with any? There's more you wanted?
It wasn't planned, Bruce. It wasn't planned. This wasn't. I never know what I'm going to write when I finish the book, and that's not just sort of rigmarole. I truly don't know. It's my most anxious period of time. Is when I finish a novel and there's a little tick-tock going on about gotta write a book, gotta write a book, gotta write a book, what book. And 2 or 3 things happened that started me thinking that I could do something again with the Renaissance as a bedrock without repeating myself, without exploring the same themes. And this one happened to fall for historical reasons in between the 2 preceding books.
Mm-hmm.
And it struck me, and Bruce's suggestion is accurate. I didn't feel done with a few people. I felt that there was more in them for me. And as I said before, if it's there for me, if I'm doing my job, it's there for the reader as well. There's no reading sequence. That never was planned to be, and there isn't. In fact, I love the idea of readers doing these 3 books in different orders, because you get a different kind of façon, a different reading experience. If you encounter those characters you like from the last book first here, and then you read the previous book, you get a really interesting façon. So that's what they were like years before. And so it can play in either direction, and I like that. I'm not being postmodern with this. It just happened to fall out that the stories work in different sequences and orders.
Oh, I can see that. So, well, I won't mention any of the characters here. No, I can see that. And as I was reading it, because you learn more about some of these characters, it was nice to see what else happened to them. But also sort of looking at the other way around, seeing what they end up doing. No, that's the same way. Okay, so we'll just stop that question.
Let me just mention, I'm going to
Please.
jump in. Ali Smith, the writer Ali Smith, the English novelist, is a terrific novelist. Published, I think it was 3 books back, published a book where half of it took place in the Renaissance, and half of it took place today, with a mother and her child going to Italy in the modern day. And she worked it out with her publishers that half of the published books were in each sequence. You didn't know when you bought the book. I suppose if you cared enough, you could look and find one. But you could either read the Renaissance section first or the modern section first, and then the other one. I think actually I've never formulated this thought before, but I wonder if, because I love that book, I wonder if that had some impact on my feeling comfortable with revisiting in this way a setting, but not in a sequential order of writing them.
Because when I was reading this, I didn't get the feeling that it was part of a trilogy or part of a set. Just there was some world that shared earlier writings and some characters that I've read before, but it didn't feel as if it was one story, just spread over several books. Okay, that's really good. And I think I have the novel by Ali Smith somewhere.
What's its name? I'm blanking. Are you blanking too?
Yes, and I'm pretty sure I have a copy of it.
Yes, it's terrible. It's terrible.
Does anyone know the Alice Smith novel? Oh,
We're at a bookstore. Somebody Google Alice Smith.
I think I know someone. I think someone can do that first.
I want to say either or, but it's not that, but it's something like that.
It's so. This is riveting for the people. I know.
You'd be like an all for YouTube. Everyone is telling us the answer.
How to be both. How to be both.
There you go.
Says the
There
voice
you
of
go.
the voice of John James.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, anyway, so I do have that, so you should read it. Now, in some of what I found some of the most memorable and hardest hitting moments in the book, in the novel, involve not even secondary characters, sometimes like tertiary characters, who have a very small role to play in the narrative of the book, but really get sometimes a very powerful moment. Really, sometimes it is just a moment or two. And at one point you write about that characters who die on the margins.
So
Characters who die on the margins, who live die on the margins of the book. And I really, so this is more of a comment, not a question. We were just talking about earlier. I love how you invest these very third level characters with the tragedy or the comedy or the respect that they deserve, because they might not be the major characters of the book, but you're still telling about a life that's lived. So that's something I love about your writing. So as I have turned this into a question, so when you think about these second or third characters who they're there because they have to come on stage and do something and then shuffle off. Why do you treat them so fully, so carefully, even if they're such a brief appearance?
first of all, thank you. Thank you. This is integrated with something that has been central for my writing for quite a long time, which is the idea that the stories weren't worth telling in history, in the past, in the present day, certainly, are not only the stories of significant people, shakers and movers, those who have a profound impact on their world and time, the stories of insignificant or marginally significant people interest me too. And one of my inspirations for that is actually, it's a painting by Bruegel and a poem by Auden.
Mm-hmm.
And Auden's poem is called Musée de Beaux-Arts. And it's about Bruegel's painting of the fall of Icarus. And you can Google that too in half an hour when we're done. The painting shows Icarus, the son of the sun god, who took his father's chariot and rode it too close to the sun, drove it too close to the sun, and plummeted into the sea to his death. And the painting shows way off in the corner, way off in the right-hand corner, the legs of someone who is already fallen headfirst into the sea. It's called The Fall of Icarus, and all you see are these legs with the rest of them already underwater. And this big canvas has carters and farmers and people on the roads and in the fields who don't notice, who don't realize that something astonishing just happened. That's how Auden wrote his poem. A boy falling out of the sky. And he began the poem by saying about suffering, they were never wrong, the old masters. And part of the way they're never wrong is that we look away a lot. We look away from suffering. We're doing it right now in the world. We look away from pain and suffering. So the painting and the poem together many, many years ago started me thinking about novels where my protagonists were not powerful, profound people, but they might encounter them. But more than that, what you're talking about is that even in their stories, in those stories, some truly marginal people might walk into the story and walk out, or walk into the story and die. And I like to try to give them a moment, to give us a moment with them, myself, the readers, to think a little bit about that. I think I say at one point that a character in this novel was a very unpleasant character. And he dies, spoiler, he dies, and you're not going to be that unhappy on the face of it. Okay, I'm going to pause for a joke because I can't resist. I'm a Winnipegger and the oldest son in the family that made a lot of jokes. And I'm remembering, I also just told this in Saskatchewan, that Clarence Darrow, the great criminal lawyer, once said, "I have never murdered anyone, but I confess that there are a few obituaries I've read with pleasure." One of my favorite lines. And I suppose what I want to do with that scene, with a couple of references, was to take away a little bit of the glibness of that person, not in the book very much, dies, carry on. Let it stick a little bit that there might have been people who cared for this person. There might have been people who wondered what happened to him. And I'm glad you like these things, Bruce, because it's important to how I see the novelist's process for myself. Everyone has their own underpinning. This is part of mine.
Thank you for mentioning process, and thank you for the kind of words. But how? Because I don't write novels, so I really don't know. So you have all these characters, and sometimes in the book, a character will be there and then doesn't show up for. It's gone for like 150 or 200 pages, and then recurs. There's one in particular I'm thinking of. Let alone characters spread over books. How do you keep track of all these people and all their lives and all their doings and their personalities? Do you have like a note cards?
With great difficulty. It's, authors can protest too much about the blood coming out of the forehead difficulty of what we do. There are harder jobs than writing books, but it's a hard job. And one of the ways it's difficult has to do with the challenges we set ourselves. There's nothing easy about writing a novel with one principal protagonist.
Yeah.
And half a dozen people they know. It's still immensely difficult to make that vivid and memorable, powerful for the reader. But you don't have to keep track. You don't have to keep track of a significant number of characters and timelines. I do not have a master board of things. I do have files on the computer now with everybody person's name, because there's a lot of names to keep track of. And one of the tasks, this is trade secret, one of the tasks that I always give my copy editor, not the principal editor, but the copy editor, who's mainly like a continuity person in some ways in film or television, to make sure the person who walked into scene 2 wearing a green jacket isn't wearing a blue jacket when you film some three months later, because you don't always film in order. That's continuity job. And in a book, I ask my copy editor to keep track every time I specify someone's eye cover, hair cover, every time they are walking east, and then I cut away from them for 100 pages and pick up 100 pages later. I do not want them bloody walking west. And I might do that. I might do that. I have done that in drafts, not necessarily east and west, east and northeast. But the challenges are real and the stress is real in the sense that you don't want to screw it up.
Mhm.
And it screws up all the time. There's what was his name? Harold Robbins. Anybody remember Harold Robbins? Was a massive bestseller in the 60s and 70s. Late in his career, apparently, this we learned from Michael Korda, who became the principal editorial figure at Random House. Michael Korda, the young editor, you won't know this story. Michael Korda was fed to the lion and had to go work with Harold Robbins on a late in life book on Robbins' yacht anchored on the French Riviera. And Robbins couldn't be bothered, could not be bothered revising, polishing, correcting, paying any more attention. He figured he writes them, people read them, keep it going. There's a casino to go to. And Korda, this is in Korda's book, so I'm assuming it's true. Korda pointed out to him, because Robbins broke in the middle of writing a book and then picked it up again, that his protagonist's name had changed. A little more than halfway through the book, the protagonist's name changes. Chapter 6, he's Joe Smith. Chapter 7, he's Hank McTavish or whatever. And it's the same person. It is the same person. There's no plot element. He hasn't had facial surgery. He's not hiding out. It's just the name changed. And Korda pointed it out to him, and Robbins, who evidently had a great deal to drink that day or night or day and night, Korda said, keeping it simple as a young editor, which name do you want? Well, plug in either one. It doesn't matter to any of us. And Robbins said, forgive me, he says, fuck it, use them both. If you read that book, I never read it. I don't know which one it is. If you read that book, the name changes halfway. It's your job to figure out that it's the same person and spend the rest of the book wondering. It was martinis.
I guess my thesis on identity in the novels of Harold Robbins, I'll have to reconsider that thesis. Thank you, Guy. Bottles of Chardonnay do not drink themselves. That's what Harold Robbins is operating under. You mentioned a few minutes ago, and also the acknowledgements page, some of the books you were reading.
I'm sorry.
Some of the books you were reading.
Yeah.
Do you love doing that research? Do you like reading about?
Do I like reading about? I love it.
Yeah, that's
I
right.
love it. I love it. The writing is hell and having written is heaven. Everybody said that and everybody's right. I have a few friends, one literary friend, Andrew Piper, whom I actually met because we did a panel together. And Andrew said at some point in the panel, I love writing. I said, I will deal with you after. But at the same time, the research phase is enormous, rich fun for me. I'm learning things without responsibilities yet. I don't have to do anything with it earlier in the research phase. I'm encountering people. One of the rewards of getting older, there aren't that many, but one of the rewards of getting older is that at this stage in my life, for a couple of decades now, if I get in touch with an academic who has written a book on an obscure subject that's relevant to what I'm interested in, to put it as simply as I can, if you write about irrigation methods in medieval Spain, you don't get a lot of fan mail. You might get other academics responding positively to your take on Iberian irrigation. but you're not going to get strangers from out of nowhere saying, I read your book with great interest, and I wonder if you have a few moments to answer a few questions I have.
Mhm.
I have gospel truth. I have never not gotten a warm, generous, immediate response. It's extraordinary. Sometimes they have read me, or their husband has read me, or the son has read me. But just as often, even if they haven't, Google works. So they know I'm not some wannabe undergrad picking their brain. They know that I'm serious about what I do.
Mhm.
So that's a joy of the pre-actual writing stage. And then I get grad student syndrome.
Mhm.
Grad student syndrome is where people defer starting to write their dissertation because there's always one more article to chase down. You cannot possibly begin until Donald, you're guilty, I know. You're looking guilty, you're in the front row looking guilty. There is always one more thing, or 5 more things
Mhm.
before you can possibly start writing. And then you know, I know by now, but then I'm stalling. Then I'm dodging, it is time.
Because I'm sure there's lots that has not been settled with Iberian ideology. I'm sure there's raging debates about it that you have to unpack those because you don't want, because there might be an Iberian hydrologist reading the novels who's trying to say that a public forum with questions.
There's a mistake I'm accused of making. Well, it goes back to any of you know Dorothy Dunnett's work, magnificent, wonderful Scottish historical fiction writer. A stupendously good series set in 16th century Europe. And I was lucky enough to meet her when I was young, 30 years older than I was. We became, to my great unexpected joy, friends, mostly by mail, fax in those days. She lived in Edinburgh. And she was hugely generous in print when I wasn't a writer at that stage, when I started publishing my books. And she said to me once after 4 or 5 of them were out, and she was meticulous in her research. It was a lesson. You talk about writers and teaching lessons. She was meticulous. She would check the weather for April 14th, 1537, in Blois in France, if she could find some way to check it, because she wanted to do something that required it not to be raining.
Yeah.
And some contemporaries might have indicated that it had rained that day. She did that. And she said to me once, Guy, I don't understand. This bears on your question earlier. When Bruce asked about the quarter term, that it's not actual history. I said, Guy, you do almost, with an emphasis on almost, as much research as I do. And it was true. It's only almost.
Yes.
And then you just throw it all away. And I make it worse because I change settings. I don't have one thing I've researched that I can stay with for 20 years. I'm an idiot, you know. I start all over again every time, which is also why it takes me time.
Yes.
Throw it all away.
Throw it all away, because you can do whatever you want.
Somebody said that. I've heard that.
Yeah.
Radio interviews with that. I asked an academic before I wrote Under Heaven. I got in touch with the Asian Studies Department at the University of Toronto. And I had coffee with 2 of them separately. And one of them, a lovely, smart young academic, said, I don't understand why you're so obsessed with all these details about the Tang Dynasty. I mean, it's a fantasy. You can do whatever you want.
Yeah.
I let her live, but
I just.
but I would have enjoyed reading the obituary.
I also would say I can hear Andrew Becker saying, I love to write. I can just hear him saying that because Andrew loves to write. He's a very odd man. I think we should have some questions. John?
Is John with us?
John,
One of the reasons I like to do it this way, by the way, and I know some other writers who start, is A, we can avoid spoilers. If somebody is dying to know why in chapter 6 of a book I wrote 20 years ago, I killed so-and-so, and there's a room full of people who haven't read that book. So I want to avoid that. And the other thing is that, God help us all, we live in an age of, as Bruce jokingly said, this is more in the nature of a comment than a question. And those can run 5 to 7 minutes of the 10 minutes we've got. So, oh, that's interesting. This bears on historical and contemporary. Somebody writes, your books introduced me to the concept of spring being the season of war. Putin launched his war on Ukraine in the spring. Thoughts? Yeah, lots of thoughts. Historically, it was universally known that you couldn't keep an army in the field through the winter. You couldn't, depending on your climate, but certainly for European climate, you could not shelter them, you could not feed them. If you wanted to keep an army, had to go back. A large army, small armies could live off the land, but a large army had to get back by fall. Getting trapped in winter, think about Napoleon and the retreat from Moscow. Think about the Nazis and the retreat from Moscow. Winter killed armies. Spring killed everybody else. And still does. Because spring offensives, spring launches of war have to do with not trapping your army in the field in an impossible time and place. And we're so used to thinking, oh, it's spring. It's the butterflies. It's people are wearing sexy clothes again instead of parkas. I'm a Winnipegger, I know. We have an inherently benign sense of what springtime means, and rightly so. But I've written in a few of the books, I've tried to underscore that that's contextual. That's because we're relatively protected and sheltered from what springtime could and did mean and does mean in Ukraine right now. So that's a great question. No bloody way. Which of your novels is your favorite? Not happening. Same with my 2 sons, not happening. Okay, this is cute, but it's just cute. Why are you not seeking a spot on Stephen Colbert since he's such a fan of The Lord of the Rings? Well, I'm not J.R.R. Tolkien. Yes, I know he is, and people have brought that up over the years. I'm too old to chase associational luster by now. At this point, 15 novels in and 40 years of writing in, I don't have a Jones for the possible frisson that might come from talking to somebody I find very clever and very funny about an experience that was very early in my life, before I was a writer, when I was a bright student, about to be an academic, and then managed to dodge that. So that's saving a lot of students a lot of suffering. It would have been a very hard mark. Oh my God, another essay question, a good one, but it's an essay question. What are the challenges of world building? Every novelist is building a world. We tend to oversimplify. When we talk about world building, for those of you who aren't embedded in it, it's usually used now in the context of fantasy literature as a shorthand word for building the world in which the story takes place, making it flora and fauna and history, geography, politics of the past. And to a certain degree, I want to be careful here, to a certain degree, I think it over-dominates the thinking, for my purposes, of some writers and some readers, because it's more like constructing a New York Times jigsaw puzzle rather than building a story in a setting that matters with people who matter. It's more about laying out the hierarchy of the court 200 years before the book began. And that's wonderful fun. When I talked before about research being fun for me, I think for a lot of writers, that world building stage is fun for them. They're not yet caught up in the responsibility of writing convincing dialogue and plot turns. It's just enjoyment. I don't approach it that way because if you know me at all, if you've been here for 50 minutes now, I'm building on history. You could say cheating, or you could say taking another path through the forest. I'm building on events of real history and real, in most cases, European, 2 books, Chinese, historical realities, and riffing on those. So the building is done by the past and by the academics, as I mentioned, who've written and researched about it, that I can read in my travels sometimes too. I do not time travel. And I wouldn't tell you if I did. And the last one I've got, oh, well, we just talked about that, but it's a great question. What gives you more joy, research or writing? Everybody? Research. Thank you. We good, John?
Well, we are just approaching the top of the hour, so I turn things over to you if you have any closing questions, and then I'll offer some thrilling words about signing.
I can't wait to hear John's exciting words about signing. It'll make the last 50 minutes just, he'll be the cherry on the birthday cake.
I'll say one thing, it's not a big thing. I mean, basically the point I want to share with you. Because I had this conversation last week with a number of my friends in Toronto who were my boyhood friends here. As some of you know, I taught classes at Grand Park High in this mall when it was a third the size it is now. I used to joke when I appeared at the beginning of my career that if anyone saw a large man with black rimmed glasses and a gray nondescript tie approaching, let me know so I could get out of the back. Because that was Mr. Hollenquist, the vice principal of Grand Park High. It was standard for me to say that here in the early days. But talking with my friends about how invariably we still call ourselves Winnipeggers. Most of us have been in another city, Vancouver, Edmonton, Toronto. We have lived outside of Winnipeg, in my case, since my early 20s, and I'm still a Winnipegger. If I'm asked by someone, I still define myself as a Winnipegger, as a prairie boy. I tell stories about prairie stubbornness being part of what kept me going. And I find it fascinating that without exception, the men and women I talk to about this, who have been away from Winnipeg for 30, 40 years, in some cases more, are still Winnipeggers. It means a lot to me to be back here, to be sharing an hour with you here. This store, this city, this mall without Mr. Hollenquist, this means a lot. So when I said at the beginning how happy I was to be back, it's a deeply sincere observation. Thank you all for coming.
you so very much, Guy. There are few people I would prefer to hear speak about writing for an extended period of time. It's always so incredible to hear both your thoughts about the work that you create and also your research methods and just the thought that goes into every single page of these books. So thank you so much for sharing. We will be moving along to the signing period. So in just a moment, we will again safely transport Guy over to the signing table. It perhaps will be in a group of oiled booksellers lifting him on a litter, or we may simply wander over there. So you can stay tuned for that. Or a piggyback. At that point, we'll ask you all to join us and I'll let you know when we're situated. At that point, you can fall into line. I will walk down the line with Post-it notes and a marker. This is just to ensure you can spend more time when you actually get to the signing table speaking rather than simply spelling your name when you arrive, and helps everything move smoothly. One thing I will point out is that as of 8 o'clock, the store will be closed. This affects the general public, but not you. Please rest assured that you may stay here in line as long as you're waiting to get your book signed. We have copies of All the Seas of the World available behind our front cash desk and also at the signing table. We also have copies of Guy Kay's vast back catalog on a large display immediately behind him. So if you'd like any other books, please do let us know. I will be wandering up and down the line if any of you have any questions. Otherwise, thank you so very much for joining us here this evening, for your attention, for your contributions. Thank you to Penguin Canada for publishing this book, to Bruce Symaka for his inimitable hosting, for which I will ask for a round of applause. And of course, one more time for Guy Gavriel Kay.